recorded as well on my computer. I want to say welcome. So welcome. It is October the 2nd, and we are into the second or at the first of our October 2 calls on the 2nd of October. I want to welcome those of you. We've got Lisa and Jean here already. The call is officially going to start in about 2 minutes. So let me invite those of you that are here before we get started. Are there any burning questions today about breakouts that sizzle or go kerplunk? That's really the name of the game today. So Lisa or Jean, as we're waiting on others or to join us or maybe not, do you have any burning questions you'd like me to incorporate?
I'm just going to try to suck up everything you give me.
Okay, well, that's the intent of these calls and the conversations. And it's been interesting, we've had several, sometimes just a few people on the calls, other times more people on the calls, but a lot of people are listening to them. And that's got me excited. Again, in bringing this new book out into the world, really want to give people practical tips and ideas because that's what Effective Virtual Conversations is about. Not only my book, but also in helping you have better context, have better conversations with the people that you are in dialogue with. So we are recording. I'm going to get going because it is Monday, and we all know what happens on Monday. So my guess is in the last couple of weeks, if you've been leading a call, or let's call it the last couple of months, if you've been on a webinar-based platform, chances are probably people aren't using breakouts. I think this is really an overlooked opportunity, and it's one of the things that can move us from death by webinar into a more engaging call. So for the 30 minutes that we have today, wanted to really zoom into why would we even consider using breakouts? And I want to share with you some rules of thumb. Really, these are like the best practices. I'm calling them rules of thumb in this instance. And then I want to give you a chance for a few nanoseconds, of course, to think about what are the ideas for your work? How can these approaches support you? A reminder of what we've covered already. If you haven't listened into the other calls, these can be found at effectivevirtualconversations.com and the community call page. If you look up at the header, you'll actually see community call page. And I've done, I think this is number 5 or 6 of the series. The launch call was July 31st. I've had calls on engagement, platforms, what's different and what's the same. And the last call, where we had a few tech glitches to get going, finally did. But if you haven't seen that one, that's 6 activities to open and close your calls. And notice that I'm using this term calls. Calls in today's world could be phone only. It could be webinar only, where even you wouldn't see me, or it could be much more interactive virtual platform. I think when we go to look at breakouts, this takes us really into the realm of the more interactive sessions. So I'd like you, whether you're listening live or here listening to the recording, to actually think of an upcoming session. And I'm going to invite you to take some notes. Again, handwritten notes really do have a different way of connecting with our brain, of creating those new neural pathways. You can, of course, type, but research is continuing to show that we're not incorporating or integrating as much of our learning in the digital form, which is a challenge for those of us in the virtual space. So take some notes as we're going. My questions as we get started today is to get you thinking about what's the role of breakouts. As you think about your work right now, where do breakouts exist? Are they on the front burner? Are they something that you love to do but you're a little nervous about making it work? Because if you're nervous about it, the good news is it's pretty easy. And I think what we'll try to do, at least here on Zoom, is get you into a quick breakout at part of the call if you're both up for it, just so that you can see how the technology works. Because it's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to experience it. And I think really that does provide for more interactivity and engagement. Now, in your context, regardless of what platform you're using, I think there's always this big question mark of what are you able to do in the platform that you have chosen. One of the reasons why I continue to use Zoom, and I'm not paid for this endorsement, it's just a very practical plug for Zoom, is as a practitioner, this is probably one of the easiest platforms to make breakouts happen. And we'll move to a quick breakout just towards the end of our call, just to give you that experience of what it's like and how easy it really is. Because why breakouts? Why do we even want to consider this? It's not just something to like stress you out, but they really do bring people into the room. And ultimately, in most of my groups, within the first couple of minutes, if we have larger groups, i.e. 6 to 10 to 100, I actually like to put people in breakouts right away. Again, think of what it's like, the experience in the real face-to-face realm. It's sort of fun when you get to meet the other people nearby because it boosts engagement. It gets us into the room. It helps us prime for interactivity, and it connects us. So some of the reasons why we want to do breakouts are for engagement, peer learning, for application, as well as interactivity. A few calls ago, and something I usually talk about is just, how do you want to start a call? Because we really want to connect people early on to the with them, or the what's in it for me. And breakouts actually allow us to do that. So I just want to see, Lisa and Jean, would you be open to me putting you in a breakout for like 2 minutes and
Absolutely.
having you experience this, just so that we're not talking as granularly? The other thing that people who are visiting this recording are going to see how easy it is. I've simply gone into my panel. I'm going to create a breakout. I'm going to automatically let the system take you there. You're going to see a little green button come up on your screen. And I'd like you to just introduce yourselves very briefly, but tell each other, why are breakouts so important for your work right now? So I've heard Lisa say absolutely. Jean, are you up for this experimentation right now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to put you off. You'll have 2 minutes to just share your name and why are breakouts so important for your work right now. I'll see you back here, and I'm going to bring you back automatically. You will now see a little button on your screen. It's asked you to join it, and you're going to whisk off right away once you click that button. So look for the green button on your screen. There you go. So Lisa and Jean have headed out. All that I've done, and just to give sort of the back end of it, at least on this platform, basically, I've set up the breakout, and this is quite similar across platforms. If you have, small numbers, large numbers, you can allow the system to put people into breakouts. And that's where you as a facilitator will want to do a little bit of work beforehand to see what is feasible, what is possible. Zoom makes it really easy. We don't have to sync anything. People just automatically accept it and are moved outwards. And let's see the energy that Jean and Lisa come back with. My guess is they're going to be a little bit more excited than just being a static participant. As we move through our call today, I'm going to go into some of the rules of thumb, things to keep in mind as you're utilizing breakouts. I will not be getting into the technical details unless there are questions around how to make breakouts happen. If you're here with me right now, please take a moment to think through, again, what's the role of breakouts? How could it provide for more interactivity and engagement? And what capability does a platform have that you are using? Interestingly enough, it's been about 90 seconds for Jean and Lisa to go off and meet each other. And what I'm going to do is bring them back. So one thing to notice is that the recording continues with the main person in the room. The recording is not capturing, on this platform at least, what's happening in the breakout rooms. I'm going to click on my breakout room link. I'm going to close all rooms, which gives them a 60-second warning. And they're going to be back here in 1 minute. So 50 seconds from now, they'll be zooming back in. It's very easy. And again, let's see what they like about it in terms of what they see as the benefit of breakouts. We might hear, it was too fast, but you know what? It was at least an opportunity for them to get out, to get engaged, rather than sit passively listening to a conversation. And they're going to be back in about 20 seconds. So let's see as they come in. Please take a moment to think about your questions and your responses. So welcome back. We can see you here. How you doing? Was that fun?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes. Okay. So just so that you know, you're going to be recorded on the screen. You can take off your video if you'd like.
Thank
But
you.
look at how fun that was. Again, didn't take a lot of time, 2 minutes. But what would you say the benefits are? Lisa, do you want to pipe in with a couple of adjectives? What was the benefit of going to Breakout right away?
Well, at least from a learning perspective, to actually see how easy it is and what it feels like. So, as the viewer of this video or participant, but also it just gets you connected to the people that are on your call really easily, and takes away any perhaps self-consciousness about contributing going forward.
Absolutely. And, the longer we leave it, the more difficult it is. If you just do a little quick 2 minute like this, like, hi, welcome, people don't even have a chance to spaz out in terms of like, oh, I don't know what to do. With a platform, and I was speaking, and as you listen to the recording, your section won't be recorded, but I've continued on to talk a little bit about just setting up breakouts in terms of like, really what needs to happen. It's so simple and so fluid. Jean, did you want to mention anything about what you enjoyed about that quick breakout?
I will echo everything Lisa said, and I think it is important to do it initially, because to the point that she brought up, it breaks down that now you feel more comfortable to contribute. And if you're using video is a great enhancer regardless of what you look like, because it puts a face to a voice and it makes it more humanized.
Thank you for that. And again, I know for many of us, getting over the video sort of like, oh, what do I look like? That's a whole other conversation, a whole other call that we could do. But it really starts to build that trust and connection. And as I've said, and this is chapter 2 of the new book, the trust and connection is essential to have an engaging conversation. If you're feeling like you're just being talked at, if you don't feel that you're really in the room, it's very hard to actually set up a powerful learning experience. So let's get into some of the rules of thumb. And there are some things that we want to do and some things that we want to avoid just to set everyone else up for success. Number 1, don't make your breakout rooms too big. And as I was saying, when you were off in your own room, whether there are 100 people on a line, you can use many of these platforms to take people out into breakouts. Just check. Do some homework on your system, the platforms you're using, so that you know what the capabilities are with the account that you have and the numbers you have. Regardless of how many breakout rooms you can put people in, 2 to 5 people per room is usually a good number to aim for. If you put more than 5 people in a room, you now have what we would term as the social loafing effect, right? People are now starting to disconnect from each other because they don't feel that they're being seen. Even note on Zoom, actually in breakouts, you can see each other a little bit more feasibly. You'll go to what I call the Hollywood Squares version. But when I say Hollywood Squares, it's like everyone's face shows up, even if you have a certain number of people. But I would say sort of you want to aim for about 2 to 4 people in each one of those breakouts, so that, like you experienced just a few minutes ago, you have to contribute, there's like, whether it's artificial or not, like you are part of making this conversation a good thing. Once you hit 4 or 5, people start getting a little squirmish. You need to have more structure as well around, are there specific roles? Is one person leading the conversation? And, it's often awkward. It's sort of like, it's just like in the in-person room, like, who's going to be the leader? As the facilitator, set people up for success. So in the room, I'll say the person who has the shortest hair is going to be the leader of the conversation. The one with the longest hair is going to take notes. Well, that's fine if you're on a platform like this and you can see each other, or at least if people want to divulge that, actually, I have really super long hair. Like my sister's hair is like below her knees, no joke, although she cut it a couple of years ago. So she'd always be leading conversations, and I'd be, if I was in her group, I'd be the one that was taking notes. So give people roles if you have larger groups. But earlier this year, I was part of I do a lot of work with organizations, and they asked me to sit in on a virtual session that was being led. And I said, we've been getting these comments that it's just not like really effective. Well, one of the things I first noticed was that there were like 10 people in a breakout room. it was just like, it was like painful for everyone. It was painful for me to be listening to it because people were getting lost. So if you are at 2 people, as you saw, very easy for people to connect. If you have 5 people on a room, you may want to assign a leader of the conversation, someone who's going to take notes, or someone who's going to report back, someone who's going to keep time, and get the group to figure out how you as a group want to go around the circle. Another rule of thumb is leave enough time. It goes a little in contrary to what we did early on, but you don't want to rush people through dialogue about something that's really important. So if you think it's going to be 2 minutes of sharing a piece, give yourself another minute or 2 to allow people to introduce themselves, say, hey, what are we talking about again? And then give them enough time to have the discussion. I often say sort of like 8 to 10 minutes is a baseline minimum of which what we want to start with. So think about how much time is enough time. You'll want to take time on your end just to make sure that you're actually, and I'm just looking for my notes here, just to make sure that you're actually like able to keep in mind when you sent people out. Some platforms give you a timer and a time window. Other platforms, as soon as you click end breakouts, they bring them right back. So again, as a facilitator, know your platform, know what happens as breakouts close. Here in Zoom, you have usually a minute, usually, not always, but usually a minute. If someone is on the phone, they will get brought back to the main room and may evaporate, sort of, as I often call it, may just disappear for the other group members that are in the room. So leave enough time. Another rule of thumb to keep in mind is assign roles. That was what I said. Have a note taker, have a facilitator in each of the breakout rooms. One thing that you can and probably want to be doing with larger groups is actually dropping in. And most platforms allow you as a facilitator to drop in and come back out. Again, the different platforms have the ability to make it easy or a little bit more complicated. Since we're using Zoom today, I'll comment on this. I would say it's very easy. There's another little section of the breakouts, which usually in a pro account you have to start, and you are able to join a room and then leave a room. The other rule of thumb, and I'm being prompted by my notes on the Post-its here, this is why I use some different graphics today. One of the things you will want people to do is take note of what are the questions you're asking people to discuss. Because inevitably, leaving enough time, more time is spent trying to recall, what did she say we're supposed to do? So one of the things you can do proactively, at least on many of the platforms, is you can broadcast a message. It's usually called broadcast a message to the breakouts. Either in a separate Word document, have the questions written up, or because I do so much facilitation off the top of my head, once I've sent people out into breakout, one of the first things I do is look at my watch, see what time it is so that I remember how much time they have. I write that down. I don't try to think about it. I write it down and I put down on my piece of paper how much time I've given them. The second thing I'll do is, if it's a larger group, I will type into the broadcast message button what the questions are, and I'll also, again, put the time. You may want to, for longer breakouts, remind people, like, you're now midway. If it's a 15-minute breakout at 7.5 minutes, jump back in and let people know what the time is. So there's a couple of rules of thumb in terms of not only assigning roles, leaving enough time, but also helping people get some shared expectations. In, I would say, any program where you're inviting participation, we early on want to create what I call the ways of working, or you may call them the terms of engagement, the rules of engagement. You want to have people comfortable, again, in like what are the expectations. As if this is a coaching group, we don't want people advising each other. So take a few minutes if it's appropriate. And I would say for longer programs, absolutely, this is one of the things you do before you put people in breakout. What are the expectations in terms of like sharing information around confidentiality, respect of differences, etc.? And what you can see here on the screen are just two very different languaging and different ways around creating ground rules or corporate terms of engagement. So the group ground rules on the right were actually co-designed by a virtual group. Those were their requirements. I usually start with start and end on time. I'll always make sure that there's confidentiality and respect in there. In a corporate setting, we may not be able to go through and hear from everyone, or in larger groups. So that's where you may want to set some expectations, like be present, tech-free time, or provide feedback real time, or again, confidentiality, respect, or what adaptations there are. So in all of this virtual work, don't forget that great facilitation is also about the basics of in-person facilitation, i.e. create your ways of working or your terms of engagement or whatever you're going to call them. Another thing that's interesting, and I think already Lisa and Jean have touched on this notion, the act of connecting, even for a couple of minutes, now gives you a bond with someone in the room that is not the facilitator or coach who is leading the call. One of the things I've really experimented with in a lot of my virtual programs over time is, what's the benefit of leaving pairs constant over time? Whether that's for the entire program, or whether it's for, say, the first month or the first quarter of a much longer program. The benefit of leaving pairs constant is they know each other. They've met with each other regularly, i.e. every call you get paired with the same person. So you know what the other person is working on if they're a business owner, or if it's a leader, you've already heard a little bit about their world and you can support or listen in a different way. So if you are thinking of using breakouts every call, which is something I would really hope you leave this call thinking about, you may want to consider the pros and cons of leaving pairs constant over time. I think often we think, oh, we've got to put people in different breakouts constantly. But one of the key elements that leads to great virtual dialogue is trust and connection. So every time, and I know I keep saying this, but it's just such an integral part of the work that we do, always be thinking about how do you build trust and connection. And one way is to leave pairs constant over time. Another thing that you'll be wanting to think about is like using a tech platform that facilitates breakouts. And I should probably have put facilitates breakouts easily. One of the reasons why I love working on this platform is that I'm able to do things that in other platforms I would need a producer. There's nothing wrong or bad about that, but there's just a lot more steps that we might need to go through in other webinar platforms that I will not refer to by name. So it's not a bad thing to bring someone else on board. In fact, in most virtual learning experiences, producers or that backup second hands person has been a prime function or a prime collaborator in the virtual space. If you are using virtual platforms, though, to coach a group, you, for a variety of reasons, including confidentiality, may not want to have a producer, someone who's just dealing with the technical aspects. If so, and if you are bringing on a producer, or I would actually say it should probably be a co-facilitator, you want to make sure that they understand confidentiality, that the group knows that they're there. Because if a group finds that there's been someone else in the background listening in and they're being coached, they're going to have automatic loss of trust. And that will shut down an entire coaching conversation. So again, in part because the technology is available, this is where for Zoom, I'm able to do a lot of this movement in and out. Of course, there's a learning curve, and the first couple of times, give yourself the space that you'll want to like really, tell people it's going to take a minute or so for me to set this up. So while you're waiting, write something down. There's always a method to my madness of saying write something down. Usually I'm doing something in the background. But really experiment with, try it out. Again, it's a little harder to put people in breakout because you need more people in the room with you. But try to find platforms that work for all the different requirements. And again, sometimes we can't be using this platform due to, just different requirements in the organizational space. Unrelated to that last point is just a reminder of just a basic. It didn't sort of fit in the big scheme of things, but a nice thing to do, which we've already modeled here, is to, like, when you welcome people back from breakout, if you have time, allow them to report back in or share knowledge across the pairs or the breakouts that have been created. Very much we want to facilitate peer learning on all different levels. And in design, we always want to be thinking about the pluses and the negatives, or the pros and cons of, how deep do we go with different learning. It's just like in a main room, in a face-to-face environment. You hear from group A and they've lasered into the topic of this. You hear from group B and they've had a totally different take on this. And as we're listening across even groups A and B, we realize there's some great learning that I would have never heard unless we had shared it in the big room. So similar to in-person facilitation, think about the value add if you do allow for groups to be able to share their knowledge, share their insights when they come back to the main room. What is different, well, in some respects, is it's a little harder to let people know you're going to be needing to share a couple of pieces. You can either broadcast that to the virtual breakout rooms, or you can also drop in. Again, it will depend. If you have like 20 different breakout groups, it can be hard for you to actually drop into all of those. But rule of thumb, if you're using breakouts, what's the share back? Is it verbal? Is it annotation? And just a little plug for the monthly newsletter that's just started up. I'm doing a new monthly newsletter specific to virtual conversations. And you can sign up for that over at effectivevirtualconversations.com. The article for September was on 5 ways to use annotation. And I think annotation is something we don't always utilize widely. Whenever I even use the term annotation these days, people are like, what's annotation? Annotation is simply getting someone to grab the pen and start writing. So one of the learnings from earlier on is getting people to connect with their WIFM. One reason why we would actually get people to use breakouts is because we could get people to focus in on their WIFM. And hopefully on your screen, you're also seeing me write that in red. Erase that now. And we are almost just a few minutes from the end of our call. And just as we go to wrap up, I'd like you to be thinking about reporting back. What is the thing that you want to do to report back? Or alternatively, is there a way you can bring breakouts across the call in different ways? Mixing it up. Do we do breakouts at the start? Do we bring them back together in the middle? Do we do it again at the end? If you have time and space, a great thing to do. If not, maybe use chat to bring the ideas back into the call. So I've shared a couple of key ideas here. I'm going to put it over to you, but rather than have you share it by chat, I want to give you the opportunity to try annotation on your Zoom bar, wherever you see the little video or the little audio. You will probably also find an annotation function. I'd like you to grab your pen, and using the Post-it notes here, I want you to share with us not what is your next step, but what's one of the key things you learned about breakouts today. I'm going to twist this up a little bit. So using your pen with annotation, if you can play with me here, what's one thing you learned about breakouts? It could be anything, something you want to do, how to do it. Just grab a Post-it note here, color of your choice, and let's just identify some of the key learning from today's step about the breakout functionality. Okay, so hopefully you found annotate. Once you go to annotate, grab a pen, grab something else, grab a text. You can also do text. So for one of you, it was size of groups. For me, it's about helping people connect with the WIFM. What else was useful in terms of looking at this topic today of breakouts? I think another thing that I wanted to highlight is just the importance of assigning rules. Oh, someone else grabbed the green one. And platform requirements, absolutely. So a very proactive way is to be aware of what is possible within your domain, and that may require some practice. So looking at using annotation, we'll do another session on annotation because it's really another key thing. I go into more detail around annotation in the new book, as well as breakouts scattered throughout. So with that, over to you now. I'd like you on your piece of paper to take note of what are your next steps. As you think about breakouts, your world of work, what are your next steps, and perhaps what are also your main questions about this? Do some research, build in some time. I've also got another slide here. If you don't like this notion of like 12 post-it notes, notice the difference when you just go to 3 bullet points. I'm all about keeping things easy and streamlined. And in fact, I'm going to be starting to use this next step slide with more of my groups because it's a little less messy than this other one. So as we go to wrap up, 3 bullet points. Please note your 3 bullet points as next steps for yourself. You don't need to type it on a screen this time. I'm going to keep talking because I want to make a couple of announcements and a couple more things to keep in mind this month on Tuesdays and Wednesdays at the Teams 365 blog. I've just started a new series, and it's called 20 Ways, 20 Exercises to Work with Virtual and Remote Teams. This little speech bubble, you'll find activities linking into all of these. We're only at number 3 or 4 now, so stay tuned. Teams 365 blog at Potentials Realized on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. I'll try to make sure that they're circulated out into our social media feeds. We have a couple of upcoming programs, paid programs related to this topic that I hope you'll consider joining me for. Of course, a Learning Lab and Design Studio that meets on Friday mornings twice a month. And this fall, starting November 13th, our next group of Virtual Facilitation Essentials will start on Monday afternoons. And I have a longer 15-hour train-a-trainer, a virtual train-a-trainer that will start Fridays starting November 3rd. So hope that you might consider joining us for that. More on these programs at Effective Virtual Conversations, as well as groupcoachingessentials.com. Our next October call, if you enjoyed this one, I hope you'll join me for the next one. It will take place on October the 16th, called Marketing for Your Virtual Events. And I think that's going to be a topic of great interest for others. We have a whole slew of calls scheduled to the end of the year. I hope that you're taking advantage of these, and those will taper off in 2018. So with that, Jean, Lisa, what's one learning that you're leaving our call with today, just to bring your voice back into the room here?
I need to get on top of this ASAP for my upcoming virtual meeting.
All right, well, do some research, do some practice. Remember, it's usually pretty straightforward and it adds tremendous value. So thanks for joining us today, Lisa. Jean, what's been your learning from today's call?
I think I want to play with or experiment with the different platforms. I have obviously experience in doing virtual facilitation, so I have some criteria that I want to see how easy it is to use.
Yeah, and there's great difference across platforms. Anyone who has the Effective Virtual Conversations book, take a look at Appendix A. You'll see many of those platforms listed there. So with that, thanks for joining me. And I will be posting this recording over at effectivevirtualconversations.com on the community calls page. Hope to see you back here October 16th. That call will start at 11:35 a.m. Toronto or New York time. So be well. Have a great week, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Bye.